At my father's 60th birthday gala, my sister snatched the crutch from my grip and screamed that I was just a leech before I smashed onto the cold marble. Their laughter was cut short when a surgeon stepped forward and spoke 6 words that shattered her world. They thought I was a broken burden, but I had entered with a limp and would leave with their destiny locked in my briefcase. It all began when she stole my balance. My name is Freya Wilkins, and as I stepped out of the battered sedan of my rideshare, the humidity of the Dallas night clung to my skin like a second, unwanted layer of clothing. The valet stand at the Aurora Grand Hotel was a parade of German engineering and Italian design. There were Bentleys, Porsches, and custom Range Rovers idling in a line that cost more than the GDP of a small island nation. My ride, a dented Toyota with a driver who had spent the last 20 minutes complaining about the traffic on the tollway, looked like a rust stain on a silk sheet. I thanked the driver, tipping him better than I should have considering the smell of stale cigarettes in his back seat, and maneuvered my way out. It was a production. It always was. First came the heavy aluminum crutch, planting its rubber tip onto the pristine pavement. Then came the shift of weight, the gritted teeth, and finally, the drag of my left leg. The pain was a dull, rhythmic thrumming, a background noise I had lived with for 5 years. It was loud tonight, perhaps sensing the tension that had been coiling in my gut since I received the invitation. The valet did not offer to help. He stared at me, then at the crutch, and then at the car pulling away, his expression hovering somewhere between confusion and disdain. I was a visual obstruction. I was a smudge on the postcard perfection of the Aurora Grand. I straightened my spine, adjusting the strap of my modest handbag, and began the long walk toward the revolving glass doors. Inside, the lobby was a cavern of marble and gold leaf, illuminated by chandeliers that dripped crystals like frozen tears. I had barely made it past the threshold when a figure detached itself from the crowd of shimmering guests. It was my sister, Savannah Quinn. She was a vision in champagne gold. Her dress was a backless, sequined masterpiece that hugged every curve, catching the light with every breath she took. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, held in place by diamond pins that likely cost more than my entire year of rent. She moved toward me not with the warmth of a sister, but with the predatory grace of a jungle cat spotting a wounded gazelle. "You actually dared to come?" Savannah asked. Her voice was low, sharp, and cut through the ambient jazz music like a serrated blade. I tightened my grip on the handle of my crutch. "It is Dad's 60th birthday, Savannah. I was invited." "Invited out of pity. Freya, Mom didn't think you would actually show up and embarrass us." She scanned me from head to toe, her lip curling in distaste. I was wearing a simple navy dress, clean and respectable, but in this room of haute couture, I might as well have been wearing a burlap sack. "Look at you. You look like a charity case." "I am here to see Dad," I said, attempting to step around her. Savannah stepped sideways, blocking my path. In her hand, she held a crystal flute brimming with dark red wine, a stark contrast to her golden dress. Her eyes glinted with a malice that I remembered all too well from our childhood, a malice that had only sharpened with age. "You are not going in there like that," she hissed. "Not when the mayor is here, not when the investors are watching." Before I could react, before I could even shift my weight to retreat, her hand jerked. It was a practiced, fluid motion. The contents of the glass splashed across my chest, soaking into the fabric of my navy dress instantly. The cold liquid seeped through to my skin, shocking me, while the dark stains spread like a fresh wound. I gasped, looking down at the ruin of my clothes. Savannah brought a hand to her mouth in a performance of shock that would not have fooled a toddler. "Oh no," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Freya, look what you made me do. You really are clumsy, aren't you?" A waiter materialized instantly, holding a towel. Savannah waved him off, her eyes locking onto mine with a triumphant gleam. "You can't go into the ballroom looking like a bleeding heart," she declared. She turned to the staff manager who had rushed over. "Get her something to wear. Anything. Do you have a spare uniform? She can wear that. It is better than this mess. The manager looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between my stained dress and Savannah's commanding glare. Miss Quinn, I am not sure. Just do it, she snapped. Then she leaned in close to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. Wear the uniform, Freya. It suits you. At least then you will look like you serve a purpose instead of just taking up space. I stood there, the wine sticky against my skin, the humiliation burning hotter than the pain in my leg. I could have turned around. I could have walked out, called another car, and gone back to my quiet apartment. But that was what the old Freya would have done. That was what the victim would have done. I looked at her, my face a mask of calm. Fine, I said softly. I will change. Savannah smirked, satisfied that she had put the cripple back in her place. She turned on her heel and swept back into the party. As I followed the staff member toward the service corridors, a thought crystallized in my mind, sharp and dangerous. They think they are drowning me in mud, but they do not know that in the mud, there are landmines. 10 minutes later, I emerged from the staff locker room. I was wearing a black vest and black trousers that were a size too big, white shirt buttoned to the collar. I looked exactly like one of the dozens of servers circulating the room with trays of hors d'oeuvres. The anonymity of the uniform was almost comforting. It made me invisible. I entered the grand ballroom. It was a sea of Dallas elites. Real estate moguls, oil tycoons, and politicians were clustering in groups, laughing with heads thrown back. In the center of it all was a raised stage where my father, Malcolm Quinn, stood behind a podium. He looked distinguished in his tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He was in the middle of a speech, his voice booming with the charismatic baritone that had sold 1,000 subprime mortgages. Building a legacy is not just about bricks and mortar, Malcolm said, gesturing expansively with a hand that sported a gold Rolex. It is about resilience. It is about weathering the storms and standing tall. That is what the Quinn family represents. Strength. Unwavering strength. The crowd applauded politely. I stood near the swinging doors of the kitchen, gripping my crutch with one hand and clutching a thick envelope with the other. Inside that envelope was $5,000 in cash. My family thought I lived on disability checks. They thought I scraped by on government handouts and pity. They did not know about Novastone forensic analytics. They did not know that for the past 3 years, I had been one of the top forensic investigators in the country, tracking hidden assets and exposing fraud for major corporations from my laptop. The $5,000 was a gift, a peace offering, a token to show that I could contribute. It was my own money, earned through sleepless nights and brilliant deductions. I wanted to give it to him, despite everything, despite the neglect and the gaslighting. A small, broken part of me still wanted his approval. I wanted to walk up there and hand him the envelope and see him smile at me the way he smiled at Savannah. And to my beautiful daughter, Savannah, Malcolm continued, pointing to where she stood near the front, beaming, who has been my rock, my pride. He did not mention me. He never did. I took a breath. Steeling myself, I pushed off the wall. The rhythmic thump drag of my gait was lost in the ambient noise of the room. I navigated through the crowd, people parting around me not out of respect, but out of an aversion to looking at imperfection. I was a reminder of fragility in a room obsessed with power. I made my way toward the stage. I just wanted to wish him a happy birthday. I just wanted to hand him the envelope. As I neared the VIP section, the crowd thinned. I saw Ethan Cole, Savannah's husband, standing near the steps leading up to the stage. He was holding a scotch, looking every bit the successful financial advisor he claimed to be. He saw me coming. His eyes narrowed, not with surprise, but with calculation. I was 3 feet away from him. I moved my crutch forward to take the next step. Ethan did not shove me. That would have been too obvious. Instead, with the casual grace of a man adjusting his stance, he slid his polished Oxford shoe outward. It was a precise, subtle movement, placing his foot exactly where the rubber tip of my crutch was meant to land. I brought the crutch down. Instead of finding the solid friction of the carpet, The rubber tip glanced off the slick leather of his shoe. My balance vanished instantly. I pitched forward, a gasp escaping my throat. My arms flailed, seeking purchase in the air. I managed to catch myself on a high cocktail table, the glasses rattling ominously, but I did not fall completely. I hung there, suspended in a moment of panic, my bad leg trembling violently under the strain. "Watch it," Ethan snapped, loud enough to draw attention. He looked at me with mock disgust. "You are drunk, Freya." "I am not," I stammered, trying to right myself, trying to find a stable spot for the crutch. But before I could recover, Savannah was there. She had materialized from the crowd like a specter. She did not offer a hand to steady me. Instead, her fingers wrapped around the aluminum shaft of my crutch. "Give me that!" she shrieked. "Savannah, no!" I cried out, my knuckles turning white as I tried to hold on. It was my lifeline. It was the only thing keeping me upright. She yanked it. She yanked it with a ferocity that spoke of years of resentment, years of hating the fact that my existence was a blemish on her perfect life. The rubber handle slipped from my sweaty palm. The room seemed to go silent. The jazz band stopped. The conversation died. All eyes turned to the spectacle near the stage. Savannah stood there, holding my crutch like a trophy, her face twisted in an ugly sneer. She raised her voice, projecting it to the back of the room, ensuring that every investor, every rival, and every socialite heard her verdict. "Stop faking it!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You are just leeching. We are sick of it." Without the crutch, my leg gave way. It was not a slow descent. It was a collapse. My knee buckled, the damaged nerves firing bolts of white-hot agony up my spine. I plummeted. My shoulder struck the hard, unforgiving marble floor with a sickening thud. The envelope of money flew from my hand, sliding across the polished stone and coming to rest near Malcolm's feet. I lay there, the breath knocked out of me, the pain radiating from my hip to my ankle. I looked up from the floor. I saw the blurred faces of the Dallas elite looking down at me. I saw Malcolm on stage, freezing, his face pale not with concern, but with embarrassment. I saw Ethan smirking behind his glass, and I saw Savannah, standing over me with the crutch in her hand, panting slightly, looking like a queen who had just executed a traitor. They thought this was the end of me. They thought this was the moment I would finally disappear into the cracks of the floorboards. But as I lay on that cold stone, staring up at the crystal chandelier, the tears did not come. Instead, something else clicked into place. The last tether of loyalty snapped. The final hope for love was extinguished, leaving only a cold, hard resolve in its place. They wanted a show. I would give them a show, but they had no idea that the script had just changed. The impact with the marble floor did not just break my physical composure. It shattered the barrier I had built around my memories. As my cheek pressed against the cold, unforgiving stone of the Aurora Grand Ballroom, the present faded into a blur of terrified whispers and clinking glass. The sensation of helplessness was a hook, dragging me backward through time, pulling me away from the gala and dropping me onto a rain-slicked highway 5 years ago. The cold of the marble became the biting chill of the night air rushing through a cracked window. The smell of expensive perfume and hors d'oeuvres was replaced by the acrid stench of burnt rubber and cheap vodka. I was in the passenger seat of Savannah's convertible. The top was up, but the rain was hammering against the canvas like gravel. The speedometer was climbing past 90, the needle trembling as it pushed further into the red. Savannah was laughing, a manic, high-pitched sound that grated against my nerves. Her eyes were glassy, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She had downed 4 shots of tequila before we left the bar, insisting she was fine to drive because she knew the back roads. "Savannah, slow down," I pleaded, my hand gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles turned white. "The road is flooding. You are going to kill us." "You are such a killjoy, Freya," she slurred, taking one hand off the wheel to wave dismissively at me. The car swerved slightly, tires hydroplaning for a terrifying second before catching traction again. I am in total control. Just relax. God, you have always been so uptight. I am serious. Pull over, I shouted, reaching for the wheel. Don't touch it, she snapped, slapping my hand away. Her eyes left the road to glare at me. That was when it happened. In the split second she looked at me. The headlights of an oncoming truck flooded the cabin with blinding white light. We had drifted across the double yellow line. The horn of the 18-wheeler blasted, a deafening roar that vibrated in my chest. Savannah froze. She did not scream. She did not turn the wheel. She just stared at the oncoming death with wide, drunken eyes. Instinct took over. I did not think. I moved. I lunged across the center console, grabbing the steering wheel with both hands and yanking it hard to the right. I knew what I was doing. I was throwing the passenger side, my side, into the path of the guardrail to spin us away from the head-on collision. I was trading my safety for hers. The car spun. The world became a kaleidoscope of asphalt, metal, and darkness. The sound was the worst part. It was not a crash. It was a scream of tearing steel. The passenger side slammed into the concrete barrier with the force of a bomb going off. The dashboard collapsed inward, crushing my legs. The windshield shattered into a million diamonds. Then, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the silence was heavy and smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. I was in a hospital room. The lights dimmed low. My body felt heavy, pinned down by a leaden fatigue, but my left leg was on fire. It was a throbbing, red-hot agony that pulsed in time with the beeping of the monitor beside my bed. I tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea pushed me back down. "She is awake," a voice whispered. It was my mother, Lorraine. I turned my head. My parents were standing in the corner of the room, but they were not looking at me. They were huddled with a uniformed police officer. The officer held a clipboard, looking bored and tired. "Mom?" I croaked, my throat feeling like it was filled with sand. Lorraine turned. Her face was pale, her makeup perfectly applied despite the hour. There was no relief in her eyes, only a sharp, calculating anxiety. Malcolm, my father, stepped forward. He looked impeccable in his suit, though his tie was slightly loosened. "Freya," Malcolm said, his voice low and serious. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask about my pain. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, blocking my view of the officer. "We need to talk. We need to handle this situation." "Where is Savannah?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Is she okay?" "She is fine," Lorraine said quickly, stepping up beside Malcolm. "Not a scratch. Miraculous. Really. She is resting in the waiting room." "Thank God," I breathed, closing my eyes. "But there is a problem, Freya," Malcolm continued, his tone hardening. "The police found the open bottle in the car. They know someone was drinking. If they pin this on Savannah, her scholarship to Yale is gone. Her reputation will be destroyed before her life even begins. A DUI with bodily injury? She would go to jail, Freya." I looked at him, confusion clouding my drugged mind. "What are you saying?" Malcolm took my hand. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a restraint. "You were the one found closest to the damage. The impact jammed the doors. It was chaotic. The officer. He is a friend of a business associate. He is willing to write the report a certain way, but he needs a statement." I pulled my hand away, the horror dawning on me colder than the IV fluid dripping into my vein. "You want me to say I was driving?" "You do not have a scholarship to lose," Lorraine interjected, her voice shrill. "You are taking a gap year. You have time to recover. Savannah is on a fast track. We cannot let one mistake ruin her future. You are the strong one, Freya. You always have been." "One mistake?" I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "She was drunk. She almost killed us." "And you saved her," Malcolm said, framing it like a compliment. "Finish the job. Freya, save her life. If you take the blame, the judge will be lenient. You are the injured party. They will see a tragic accident involving a young girl who lost control on a slick road, a suspended license, maybe some community service, but if Savannah takes the fall, it is a felony. The door opened, and a doctor walked in. He looked grim. He looked at the clipboard at the foot of my bed, and then at my parents. "The damage to the left leg is catastrophic," the doctor said bluntly. "Multiple compound fractures, nerve damage. We saved the leg, but she will likely need assistance walking for the rest of her life. Chronic pain is a certainty." My world collapsed. I looked at my legs under the sheet. One was encased in a thick plaster cast, elevated on a sling. "See?" Malcolm hissed, leaning in close to my ear as the doctor checked the monitors. "You are already hurt. The punishment has already happened. Why drag your sister down too? Don't be selfish." Freya. Selfish. The word hung in the air like poison. I looked at my mother, begging for her to defend me, to say that it was unfair to ask me to destroy my record for a crime I did not commit. Lorraine just looked away, smoothing the wrinkles on her skirt. "The officer is waiting," Malcolm said, placing a pen and a clipboard on my chest. "Sign the admission. Do it for the family." I was in agony. I was 17 years old. I was scared, and foolishly, desperately. I trusted that they loved me. I thought that if I did this, if I made this sacrifice, they would see my worth. They would value me. With a trembling hand, I picked up the pen. The ink flowed onto the paper. Sealing my fate, I signed my name, Freya Wilkins. The next 6 months were a blur of courtrooms and physical therapy. As Malcolm predicted, the judge was lenient because of my severe injuries. I lost my license for 2 years and received probation, but the real sentence was not handed down by the court. I moved back into my parents' house because I could not walk, let alone work. They installed a ramp, but they made sure to mention how much it cost every time they walked past it. Savannah went to Yale. She posted photos of tailgates, parties, and study sessions in the library. She looked radiant, unburdened, and free. She never thanked me, not once. In fact, she began to rewrite history. She told people she was the passenger, the victim of her reckless older sister. She cried crocodile tears when people asked about the accident, saying how traumatic it was to watch me ruin my life. Back home, the dynamic shifted. I was no longer the daughter. I was the debt. One evening, 3 months after the accident, I was sitting at the kitchen table, struggling to navigate the classifieds for remote work. Malcolm walked in and placed a piece of paper in front of me. It was a spreadsheet. "What is this?" I asked. "A breakdown," Malcolm said, pouring himself a scotch. "Your medical bills were covered by insurance, mostly, but the premiums went up. The electricity bill is higher because you are home all day running the AC, the food, the gas for driving you to therapy." I stared at the numbers. He had itemized my existence. "We are happy to help you." "Freya," Lorraine said from the sink, where she was arranging flowers. "But we are not a charity. You are an adult now. You need to understand the cost of living. Since you cannot work a real job, we will track this as a loan. When you get back on your feet, figuratively speaking, you can pay us back." "You want me to pay you for recovering from an accident I took the blame for?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Lower your voice," Malcolm snapped. "We kept you out of jail. We gave you a roof. Don't be ungrateful. This is the real world. Freya, nobody rides for free." They branded me. I was the leech. I was the burden. The narrative was so strong that even I began to believe it on the bad days. I was the cripple in the back room, the dark secret they kept tucked away while they celebrated Savannah's brilliance. The flashback culminated in a memory from 1 year ago, Savannah's graduation party. It was held in the garden of our estate. White tents, catered food, a string quartet. Savannah wore a white dress and her graduation cap, holding a degree in communications that Malcolm had paid for. She was surrounded by friends, laughing, toasting with champagne. I stood in the shadows of the patio, leaning heavily on my crutch. My leg was aching due to the humidity. I was wearing a dress Lorraine had bought for me at a discount store, because she said there was no point in buying nice clothes for someone who didn't go out. I watched Malcolm wrap his arm around Savannah. He raised his glass. "To my daughter," he announced, beaming with pride, "the first Quinn to graduate with honors, beauty, brains, and a clean record. You are the future of this family. Savannah." Everyone cheered. Savannah kissed his cheek, basking in the adoration. Then, she looked over her father's shoulder and saw me. For a second, our eyes met. There was no guilt in her gaze. There was no acknowledgement of the fact that her clean record was bought with my blood. There was only annoyance. She whispered something to Malcolm, and he turned to look at me. He frowned and gestured for me to go inside, shooing me away like a stray dog that had wandered too close to the buffet. I turned and limped into the empty house. That was the night the sadness finally died, and the cold, hard rage began to solidify in my chest. I realized then that they would never love me. They would only use me until there was nothing left to break. The memory faded as the pain in my hip flared, grounding me back in the present. I was lying on the floor of the Aurora Grand. The echo of Savannah's scream, "Stop faking it," was still ringing in the air. She was right about one thing. I had been faking it, but not the disability. I had been faking my helplessness. I had been faking my poverty. And I had been faking my love for them. I pushed myself up to a sitting position, my hair falling over my face. The flashback had served its purpose. It reminded me why I was here. It reminded me that the girl who signed that confession was dead. The woman who rose from this floor was someone else entirely, to the world, and specifically to the Quinn family. I was a ghost haunting the hallways of their life. I was the cautionary tale, the broken sister who lived off the scraps of their success. But the reality was a carefully constructed fortress of lies that I had built brick by brick, right under their noses. The narrative they spun was simple. Freya Wilkins was useless. Freya Wilkins needed charity. Freya Wilkins spent her days watching television and nursing a phantom pain. They were wrong on every single count. The truth was, I moved out of my parents' mausoleum of a house the very week I could hobble 10 feet without collapsing. I told them I was moving into a subsidized housing unit for the disabled. A lie that made Malcolm smirk with relief, because it meant I was finally someone else's problem. In reality, I had used a small, hidden settlement from the insurance company, one that my parents had overlooked in their haste to protect Savannah, to rent a studio apartment in Deep Ellum. It was small. It smelled faintly of old coffee and brick dust, but it was mine, and it was the headquarters of my resurrection. They saw a cripple. Novastone Forensic Analytics saw a savant. I had always been good with numbers. Before the accident, I was on track for a mathematics degree. After the accident, when my body was a cage of agony, my mind became my escape. I began studying forensic accounting online, devouring courses on data analysis, money laundering schemes, and corporate fraud. I realized that numbers, unlike people, never lied. They could be hidden, manipulated, or obscured, but they always left a trail. Novastone hired me 3 years ago. I did not walk into their office for an interview. I cracked a dummy encryption code they had hidden on their recruitment page just to see if I could. 48 hours later, I had a job offer with a starting salary of $120,000 a year. My family thought I was sitting in a dark room feeling sorry for myself. In truth, I was sitting in the first-class cabin of a plane bound for London, or Chicago, or New York. I became their lead investigator for high-stakes corporate fraud. I was the person companies called when millions of dollars vanished into thin air, and they needed someone to find the leak. I lived a double life that would have exhausted a spy. When I visited my parents for the obligatory Sunday dinners, I wore worn-out cardigans and refrained from washing my hair. I complained about the cost of generic painkillers. I let Malcolm lecture me on fiscal responsibility while I sat there knowing I had more liquid cash in my savings account than he had in his business operating fund. I let them believe I was a leech because a leech is beneath notice. You do not fear a parasite, you just tolerate it. And because they did not fear me, they were careless. Oh, they were so incredibly careless. It started with Savannah, my sister, the golden child, the influencer. Her Instagram feed was a curated gallery of perfection, sunsets in Tulum, shopping sprees on Rodeo Drive, and a penthouse apartment in uptown Dallas that she claimed she and Ethan had bought. "Hard work pays off," she would caption a photo of a new Birkin bag. I sat in my office at Novastone, sipping an espresso, and pulled up the property records for that penthouse. It was not owned by Savannah Quinn or Ethan Cole. It was a short-term corporate rental leased by a shell company, paid for on a month-to-month basis. The ownership was a fabrication. I dug deeper. The designer clothes? Most were rented or bought on credit cards that were maxed out to within an inch of their limits. Savannah was not rich. She was drowning. She was leveraging debt to maintain an image of wealth, terrified that if the world saw the cracks, she would shatter. Then there was Ethan, my brother-in-law, the man who had just tripped me in front of half of Dallas. He called himself a wealth management consultant. He liked to use big words and throw around terms like diversified portfolios and aggressive yield strategies. I ran his name through the Novastone database one rainy Tuesday night. I was looking for a connection on an unrelated case involving a pharmaceutical company in Jersey, but the algorithm flagged a cross-reference. Ethan Cole was listed as a managing partner for something called the Aurora Growth Fund. It sounded legitimate. It had a website with stock photos of smiling seniors and windmills, but when I peeled back the layers of the LLCs, looking at the transaction history, the pattern was unmistakable. It was a classic Ponzi structure. He was paying old investors with the money from new investors. There was no actual trading happening. There was no growth. It was a balloon waiting to pop. I should have stopped there. I should have turned the file over to the SEC and washed my hands of it. But then I saw the name of his biggest investor, Malcolm Quinn. My father. I froze. The glow of the monitor seemed to chill the air in my apartment. I began to type furiously, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. I accessed Malcolm's public business filings and cross-referenced them with the leaked banking data Novastone had acquired from a previous subpoena. It was worse than I thought. Malcolm was not just a victim of Ethan's scheme. He was a participant, though perhaps an unwitting one in the mechanics, but certainly complicit in the movement of funds. I saw transfers from my father's real estate holding company into the Aurora Growth Fund, and then, days later, transfers out to personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. They were laundering money, or at least, they were moving cash around to hide the fact that the Quinn real estate empire was crumbling. The successful developer persona my father projected was just as fake as Savannah's penthouse. He was over-leveraged, bleeding cash, and using Ethan's fraudulent fund to plug the holes in his sinking ship. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the silence of the room amplifying the thumping of my heart. For 5 years, they had called me a parasite. They had humiliated me, charged me for electricity, and made me feel small. And all the while, they were the ones feeding off of lies, theft, and deceit. I opened a new folder on my encrypted drive. I named it simply, The Family. From that day on, I was not just working for Novastone. I was working on my masterpiece. I tracked every dollar. I saved every incriminating email Ethan carelessly sent over unsecured servers. I downloaded the deeds, the loan applications with falsified income statements, and the foreclosure notices they had managed to bury. I watched them like a hawk circling a field of mice. I watched them mock me at Thanksgiving, making jokes about how I should get a real job. I watched Savannah roll her eyes when I couldn't afford a birthday gift for her. I absorbed every insult, every slight, and every moment of cruelty, and I converted it into data. But there was one person who knew the truth, or at least, the truth about my pain. Dr. Adrian Holt. Adrian was the orthopedic surgeon who had put my leg back together 5 years ago. He was a brilliant man, young for his reputation, with eyes that held a profound, quiet sadness. He was the only one who didn't buy the Freya is faking it narrative, mostly because he had seen the x-rays. He knew that my tibia had been shattered into 12 pieces. He knew that the nerves in my calf were permanently damaged. He knew that every step I took was a negotiation with agony. I visited his clinic once a month, not just for checkups, but because he was the only person in the world I could talk to without a mask. "You are pushing too hard, Freya," Adrian had told me 3 weeks ago, looking at the latest MRI of my leg. "The inflammation is severe. You are flying too much. You need to rest." "I can't rest yet," I had replied, sitting on the exam table, buttoning up my tailored slacks, the expensive ones I only wore when I was away from my family. "I am almost done." "Done with what?" he asked, crossing his arms. "You have enough evidence to put them away for 20 years. Why are you waiting?" "Because prison is too easy," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I do not just want justice, Adrian. I want a reckoning. I want them to feel what I felt. I want them to stand in front of the world and be stripped naked of their pretenses." Adrian sighed, but there was a flicker of admiration in his gaze. He walked over to his desk and picked up a file. "You know, medically speaking, sometimes you have to break a bone again to set it right. It is called an osteoclast." "Is that what we are doing?" I asked. "I think that is what you are doing," he said. "You are breaking the family to fix the rot." He handed me a sleek black envelope. It was my invitation to Malcolm's 60th birthday gala at the Aurora Grand. "I received one too," Adrian said. "Apparently, Malcolm wants to show off his medical connections. He thinks having a top surgeon at his party makes him look important." I took the invitation. The cardstock was heavy, the gold lettering embossed. It represented everything they valued: appearance, status, surface-level shine. "This is it," I said, tracing the date with my thumb. "This is the date." "Are you sure?" Adrian asked softly. "I am sure. It is perfect. The investors will be there, the partners, the press. It is the highest peak of their vanity." I looked up at him. "Will you help me? If I do this, I need someone to watch my back. I need someone to validate the medical truth when they try to lie." Adrian didn't hesitate. "I have been treating you for 5 years. Freya, I have watched them treat you like garbage while you fought through pain that would break a Navy SEAL. I will be there. I will bring the files." "Good," I said, slipping the invitation into my bag. "Because on that night, we are not just going to a party, we are going to perform surgery." That was the moment the plan solidified. I spent the next 3 weeks finalizing the dossier. I organized the evidence into categories: the real estate fraud, the Ponzi scheme, the identity theft. Yes, Savannah had even stolen my medical identity to obtain prescription painkillers, a little detail I discovered when I audited my own insurance history. I was ready. So, when I stood in the ballroom of the Aurora Grand, wearing that humiliating server's uniform, watching my father preen on stage, I was not afraid. When Ethan tripped me, and I fell, and Savannah screamed that I was a leech, I did not feel shame. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a trap snapping shut. They thought they had knocked me down. They did not realize that by taking my crutch, they had removed the only thing holding me back from unleashing hell. I lay on the floor, listening to their laughter die down, and I waited for Adrian's voice to cut through the silence. The operation was about to begin. The weeks leading up to the gala were not spent in mourning or anxiety. They were spent in the cold, clinical silence of a war room. I did not prepare for a party. I prepared for an execution. We met in a secure conference room on the 24th floor of a building in downtown Dallas, a space leased by Novastone for sensitive client briefings. The blinds were drawn, slicing the cityscape into ribbons of gray light. Around the mahogany table sat my counsel of war, Dr. Adrian Holt and Special Agent Miller from the Drug Enforcement Administration. Agent Miller was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain. He did not smile. He did not make small talk. He simply slid a series of surveillance photos across the polished wood surface. "We have confirmation," Miller said, his voice a low rumble. 3 different urgent care clinics in the Fort Worth area. The woman in the footage is definitely not you." I picked up the photos. They were grainy. taken from security cameras mounted high in waiting room corners. But the figure was unmistakable. It was Savannah. She was wearing a blonde wig and large sunglasses. But I knew the set of her jaw. I knew the way she held her purse. "She used your insurance card," Miller continued. "She used your social security number, and she used a photocopy of your old driver's license. In the last 6 months alone, she has obtained 32 prescriptions for OxyContin and hydrocodone. She claims chronic pain from a severe vehicular accident. She is acting out your trauma to get high." I stared at the image of my sister signing my name. It was a violation so profound it made my skin crawl. She had not only caused the injury that ruined my leg, she was now wearing that injury like a costume to feed her addiction and line her pockets. "It is not just for personal use," I said, tapping the photo. "She is selling the surplus." I tracked the deposits in her Venmo account. Small, irregular payments labeled as consulting fees or party supplies. It matches the dates of the prescription fills. Adrian, who was sitting opposite me, looked ill. He had his laptop open, displaying my actual medical history, a digital tapestry of agony. "I have compiled the complete dossier," Adrian said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Every X-ray, every MRI scan from the last 5 years. I have the nerve conduction studies proving you have complex regional pain syndrome. I have also included a sworn affidavit stating that I never prescribed these opioids to you in these quantities, and certainly not from these random strip mall clinics." He turned the screen toward Miller. "If anyone looks at Freya's leg and then looks at Savannah dancing on TikTok, the fraud is obvious. But with these documents, it is undeniable. Savannah isn't just an addict. Agent Miller, she is a predator." "We have enough to arrest her now," Miller said, looking at me. "Why wait for the birthday party?" "Because if we arrest her now, my father will spin it," I replied, my voice steady. "Malcolm will hire the best defense attorneys. He will claim Savannah has a problem, that she is the victim of pressure. He will check her into a luxury rehab in Malibu and seal the records. He will pay you off, or he will call in favors to have the charges reduced, to kill a snake. You do not cut off the tail. You cut off the head." Miller nodded slowly. "The party." "The party," I confirmed. "Everyone they care about will be there. The investors, the bank representatives, the social circle they have spent 40 years trying to impress. We do not just strip them of their freedom. We strip them of their credibility. We strip them of the one thing they value more than money, their image." I reached under the table and pulled out a heavy black leather briefcase I had purchased the day before. It was Italian leather, expensive and severe. It looked like something a judge would carry. I opened it. The interior was divided into crisp, organized sections. "I have categorized the evidence," I said, placing the files inside one by one. The first folder was blue. "Ethan," I said, "the Ponzi scheme, the wire transfers, the fake yield reports, the emails where he mocks his own investors for being gullible." The second folder was red. "Savannah," I continued, "the identity theft, the prescription fraud, the drug trafficking, the evidence that she was the driver that night 5 years ago, including the retired officer's confession that Malcolm bribed him." The third folder was black. "Malcolm." I held that one for a moment. It was the thickest. "Tax evasion," I recited. "Money laundering through the restaurant chain he claims to be a silent partner in, and the mortgage fraud." This was the final nail, the masterstroke. 2 days ago, I had initiated a sequence of financial maneuvers that would have made a Wall Street raider blush, through a shell corporation I controlled, legally registered in Delaware. I had approached the bank that held the mortgage on the Quinn family estate. Malcolm was behind on payments. He was 6 months in arrears, surviving only on extensions and the bank's reluctance to foreclose on a high-profile client. But banks are businesses. They do not like bad debt. I had contacted them as a representative of Ironvale Capital Partners. I offered to buy the distressed debt package for 80 cents on the dollar. Cash, immediate settlement, the bank, eager to offload a toxic asset before the fiscal quarter ended, accepted within 4 hours. I placed a single sheet of paper on top of the black folder. It was the assignment of deed. As of this morning, I told Adrian and Miller, Iron Vale Capital Partners owns the note on my parents' house, and since I am the sole proprietor of Iron Vale, I own the roof over their heads. They are living there because I allow it, and on Saturday night, I am going to revoke that permission. Miller actually smiled. It was a terrifying, thin expression. You are terrifying, Ms. Wilkins. I learned from the best, I said, snapping the locks of the briefcase shut. The days leading up to the Saturday gala were a blur of physical and mental rehearsal. I could not leave anything to chance, especially not the fall. I knew Ethan would try something. He was petty and insecure, and seeing me at the party would provoke him. I needed to be ready to fall, but I needed to fall in a way that looked devastating without actually shattering my hip replacement. I spent hours in my apartment with a mattress on the floor. I practiced the collapse. I learned how to twist my body, how to take the impact on my shoulder and my good hip, how to slap the floor with my hand to amplify the sound. It had to look uncontrolled. It had to look like the helpless tumble of a cripple. It was a grotesque form of choreography. I was rehearsing my own humiliation. Every time I hit the mattress, I visualized their faces. I saw Savannah's smirk. I saw Malcolm's dismissive wave. I saw the way my mother looked through me as if I were made of glass. Thump! Stop faking it! Thump! You are just a leech. By Friday night, my shoulder was bruised and my muscles ached, but I had perfected the art of the victim. I stood in front of my full-length mirror. I was wearing the simple navy dress I planned to wear before Savannah ruined it. I practiced my expression. I wiped the intelligence from my eyes. I softened my jaw. I slumped my shoulders just a fraction of an inch. I watched Freya the Avenger disappear, replaced by Freya the Broken. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Don't be late tomorrow, and try not to make a scene. Your father is very stressed. I did not reply. I simply deleted the message. Saturday arrived with a sky the color of a bruise. I spent the morning reviewing the files one last time. Every page was a bullet. Every spreadsheet was a blade. I sealed the briefcase with a tamper-proof tag, just like we did with evidence at Novastone. At 6 p.m, I called the rideshare. I picked up my crutch. It felt heavy in my hand, a symbol of everything they had taken from me. I looked around my apartment. It was clean, modern, and silent. It was the sanctuary I had built from the ashes of my life. When I returned here tonight, everything would be different. The secret would be out. The bridge back to my family would be not just burned, but nuked. I walked to the door. My reflection caught in the hallway mirror. I did not look like a monster. I did not look like a hero. I looked like a woman who was done bleeding for people who held the knife. I picked up the black briefcase. It was heavy, weighing perhaps 10 pounds, but it felt weightless to me. It contained the fate of 4 people. It contained justice. I stepped out into the hallway and locked the door. Click. The sound of the lock engaging was final. It was the sound of a chamber being loaded. It was the sound of a judge's gavel hitting the sound block. They were already celebrating at the Aurora Grand. They were drinking champagne and patting themselves on the back, oblivious to the fact that the Reaper was currently sitting in the back of a Toyota Camry, checking the traffic on Google Maps. I closed my eyes and let the rhythm of the car soothe me. I was ready to play my part. I was ready to fall so that I could finally stand. The silence that followed Savannah's scream was not the silence of agreement. It was the silence of a held breath, the kind that precedes a detonation. I lay on the cold marble, my shoulder throbbing, looking up at the chandelier that blurred through the sudden tears of pain I refused to shed. Savannah stood over me, chest heaving, clutching my crutch like a weapon. She looked around the room, desperate for validation, waiting for the applause that usually accompanied her cruelty. "She is fine," Savannah announced to the room, her voice cracking slightly. "She does this for attention. It is just a bruise." That was when Dr. Adrian Holt stepped out from the shadows of the stage wings. He did not run. He walked with the terrifying calm of a man entering a sterile operating theater. He wore a tuxedo, but he moved like he was in scrubs. In his hand, he held a tablet. He did not look at me. He looked at the audiovisual technician manning the control booth near the stage and nodded once. "Cut the feed," Adrian commanded, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "And switch to input B." The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of Malcolm's life achievements, golf trips, ribbon cuttings, staged family photos, flickered and went black. A second later, it roared back to life with a high-definition, three-dimensional medical image. It was a rotating MRI scan of a human lower leg. The room gasped. It was a grotesque landscape of ruin. The tibia was held together by a complex lattice of titanium rods and 13 screws. The surrounding tissue was scarred and atrophied. The nerve pathways, highlighted in angry red on the scan, looked like frayed wires. "That," Adrian's voice sliced through the air, "is the leg of the woman on the floor. It is not a fake injury. It is a catastrophic reconstruction held together by metal and willpower." He walked over to Savannah, who had frozen, the crutch dangling from her hand. He gently took it from her grip. She was too stunned to resist. "You just kicked a woman with complex regional pain syndrome," Adrian said, loud enough for the mayor in the front row to hear. "Congratulations, Mrs. Cole. You just committed assault on a disabled person." Malcolm moved instantly. His face was a mask of purple rage, but his survival instinct was sharper than ever. He grabbed the microphone. "A misunderstanding," he boomed, trying to laugh it off, though the sound was hollow. "Too much wine. A family prank gone wrong. Everyone, please, enjoy the dessert. The band will play on." He jumped off the stage, flanked by Ethan and my mother. They descended upon me not to help me up, but to hide the evidence. Malcolm grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "Get up," he hissed into my ear. "VIP room, now." Adrian helped me to my feet, acting as the human crutch my sister had refused to be. We were marched out of the ballroom, away from the prying eyes of the investors, and into the Aurora Suite, a private conference room reserved for high-profile guests. The moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut, blocking out the sound of the jazz band, the atmosphere shifted from embarrassment to violence. Lorraine did not wait. She crossed the room in 2 strides and slapped me across the face. The sound was sharp, like a pistol crack in the small room. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate, radiating across my cheek, but I did not flinch. I slowly turned back to look at her. "You selfish, ungrateful little wretch," my mother spat, her hands trembling. "Your father's big night, the most important night of his career, and you had to make it about you. You had to make a scene." "I did not make the scene, Mother," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Savannah did." "Because you provoked her!" Savannah screamed, throwing herself onto a velvet sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Look at me! I look like a monster out there. My followers are going to think I'm a bully." "You are a bully, Savannah," Adrian said, standing beside me, his posture rigid. Ethan stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Who the hell is this guy, anyway? Some actor you hired to fake those medical scans? How much did she pay you, pal? $500? "I am Dr. Adrian Holt," Adrian said, adjusting his cuffs. "Head of orthopedic surgery at Mercy General, and unlike your financial credentials, Ethan, mine are real." Ethan blinked, taken aback, but Malcolm slammed his hand down on the mahogany conference table, demanding attention. "Enough!" Malcolm roared. He paced the room, loosening his bow tie, sweat beading on his forehead. "The damage is done. The investors saw. The mayor saw. We have to spin this. We have to say Freya had a reaction to medication, that she was delirious." He turned on me, his eyes cold and devoid of any paternal warmth. He walked over to his briefcase, a brown, ostentatious Louis Vuitton bag, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound notebook. "But before we fix the public perception," Malcolm said, "we are going to fix the internal problem. You have been a drain on this family for 5 years. Freya, we have carried you, we have sheltered you, and tonight you repaid us with humiliation. He threw the notebook onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of me. "Open it," he commanded. I opened the book. It was a ledger. Handwriting that I recognized as my father's filled the pages. Columns of dates and numbers. January electric bill. Surcharge, $150. Specialized diet food, $300. Wheelchair ramp installation, $2,000. Physical therapy transportation gas, $40. It went on for pages. He had monetized my recovery. He had turned my survival into an invoice. "I have kept track," Malcolm said, his voice dropping to a businesslike register. "Every cent we spent keeping you alive after you wrecked that car. And I added a new line item tonight, a reputation damage fee. Because of you, I might lose the devastating contract with the city." He tapped the page. "The total comes to $212,450. I looked at the number. It was absurd. It was petty. And it was exactly what I expected. "I do not have $200,000, Dad," I said softly. "We know you don't," Savannah piped up from the sofa. She had stopped crying miraculously fast. She sat up, wiping her eyes, looking at me with a greedy calculation. "But you have Grandma's house." The air in the room seemed to vanish. My grandmother, Lorraine's mother, had left me a small, dilapidated cottage in the older part of Dallas when she passed away 2 years ago. It was the only thing anyone had ever given me that wasn't a loan or an insult. It was worth, perhaps, $300,000 in the current market. "We are in a tight spot, Freya," Savannah said, her voice taking on a wheedling, manipulative tone. "Ethan's fund is going through a reorganization. Liquidity is tight. Dad's business is leveraging for expansion. We are a family. We help each other. You have been living off us for 5 years. It is time you paid your share." "You want me to give you my house," I stated. "It is barely a house," Ethan scoffed. "It is a shack, but the land is valuable. We can flip it fast. It covers your debt to Malcolm, and the rest helps Savannah and me stabilize our cash flow until the market turns." Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He smoothed it out on the table next to the ledger. It was a quit-claim deed. It was already filled out. My name was printed as the grantor. Savannah Quinn was the grantee. "Just sign it," Malcolm said, holding out a gold fountain pen. "Sign it, and we forget what happened tonight. We will even let you keep staying in your room at the main house for another 6 months, rent-free." They had planned this, the party, the humiliation, the pressure. They knew I would be here. They intended to corner me, using the guilt of the accident and the pressure of the debt to strip me of my last asset. They needed the money. They were desperate. I looked at the deed. Then I looked at the ledger. Then I looked at their faces. Malcolm's arrogance, Lorraine's disdain, Savannah's greed, Ethan's smugness. They were vultures circling a body that they thought was dead. I did not take the pen. Instead, I reached out and pulled the heavy, high-backed leather chair at the head of the table toward me. It scraped loudly against the floor, a jarring sound that made Ethan flinch. I sat down. I did not sit like a daughter being scolded. I did not sit like a cripple needing rest. I sat like a CEO convening a board meeting to dissolve a failing subsidiary. I rested my elbows on the table and steepled my fingers. The silence stretched. It grew heavy and thick, filling the corners of the room. "What are you doing?" Lorraine asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Freya, get up. That is your father's seat." I ignored her. I looked at Adrian, who was standing by the door, his arms crossed, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. I nodded once. Adrian walked forward. He was carrying the black Italian leather briefcase. He placed it on the table in front of me, directly on top of the quitclaim deed, covering it completely. The thud of the heavy case hitting the table sounded like a judge's gavel. "You have presented your bill," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the trembling weakness they were used to. "You have itemized my existence. You have calculated the cost of my pain." I reached for the latches of the briefcase. They were silver, cold to the touch. "Now," I said, looking Malcolm dead in the eye, "it is time to audit the books." Click. The sound of the latches springing open echoed in the small room. It was the sound of a safety being disengaged. It was the sound of the end. And as I lifted the lid, revealing the color-coded files that contained the ruin of the Quinn dynasty, I saw the first flicker of true, primal fear ignite in my father's eyes. He didn't know what was in the box, but he knew, with sudden, terrifying clarity, that he was no longer the one in charge. The lid of the briefcase rose, revealing not the stacks of cash my family had desperately hoped for, but neat, terrifyingly organized rows of manila folders. The disappointment in the room was palpable. A physical drop in air pressure. Savannah craned her neck, looking for a checkbook, a bank draft, anything that could save her from her own financial drowning. "What is this?" Malcolm demanded, his voice recovering some of its bluster. "I told you to sign the deed. Freya, I do not have time for your scrapbooks." I did not answer him immediately. I reached into the breast pocket of my oversized server's vest. My fingers brushed against the cold, hard edge of the object I had kept hidden there all night. I pulled it out. It was a business card, but it was not made of paper. It was laser-etched brushed steel, heavy and sharp enough to cut skin. With a flick of my wrist, I spun it across the polished mahogany table. It hissed as it slid over the varnish, rotating perfectly before coming to a stop directly in front of Ethan. Ethan looked down. I watched the blood drain from his face as if someone had pulled a plug in his heel. His eyes widened, fixing on the logo engraved in the steel, a stylized eye inside a magnifying glass. "Read it, Ethan," I commanded softly. Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror, not the annoyance he usually reserved for me, but the fear of a man who sees the executioner testing the rope. "Nova Stone Forensic Analytics," Ethan whispered. "What?" Savannah asked, annoyed. "What is that?" "Nova Stone," Ethan repeated, his voice trembling. "They are the auditors, the ones the SEC hires when they want to bury a firm. They took down the massive Horizon banking fraud in Chicago last year." "Read the title, Ethan," I said. "Senior Forensic Investigator," he read, his voice barely audible. "Freya Wilkins." Malcolm laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "That is ridiculous. You? You cannot even walk to the mailbox without winding yourself. You expect us to believe you are a high-level investigator?" "I expect you to believe the tax returns I filed last year," I said, leaning back in the leather chair. "My base salary is $350,000 a year, with bonuses and consulting fees for recovering stolen assets. I cleared nearly $500,000 last year. I have more liquid capital in my checking account right now than the entire equity of Quinn Real Estate." Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Lorraine looked at me as if I had suddenly spoken in tongues. Savannah's mouth hung open. "But you are on disability," Lorraine stammered. "We see the checks." "You see a decoy account," I replied. "I set it up 5 years ago. I let you see what you wanted to see because it was convenient for me. While you were busy mocking me for being a leech, I was flying to London to audit shell companies. While you were charging me for electricity, I was buying stock in the companies that supply it." I reached out and picked up the leather notebook Malcolm had thrown at me, his precious ledger of debt. I held it up, letting the light catch the gold embossing. $212,000, I mused. "You calculated the cost of every meal, every kilowatt, every shred of dignity you thought you provided me." I stood up, balancing my weight on my good leg, and walked over to the brass wastebasket in the corner of the room. I held the notebook over it. "That is petty cash, Dad," I said. I dropped the book. It landed in the bin with a heavy thud. "And now," I said, turning back to the table, "let us look at the real numbers." I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the first file. It was thick, labeled Malcolm Quinn, Personal and Corporate Financials. I tossed it onto the table. The papers fanned out, revealing bank statements, transfer records, and highlighted anomalies. "For the last 6 months," I said, my voice cold and surgical, "I have been conducting a forensic audit of this family. I treated you just like any other case of corporate malfeasance. I tracked the money in, and I tracked the money out." Malcolm reached for the papers, his hands shaking. He saw a spreadsheet detailing transfers from his business accounts to offshore entities. He saw dates, times, and amounts. "Where did you get these?" he whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "These are private." "Nothing is private when you are sloppy," I said. "And you are incredibly sloppy. Dad, you have been bleeding cash from the company to pay for Savannah's lifestyle and to cover Ethan's gambling debts masquerading as investment losses. You are not expanding. You are insolvent. You have been robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you just ran out of Paul's." I pointed to a specific document, a line graph showing a steep red decline. "You wanted the deed to Grandma's house because it is the only unencumbered asset left within your reach," I explained, breaking down their scheme like a lecture. "You needed to collateralize it to get a bridge loan to pay off the interest on your primary business loan. You were going to steal my house to buy yourself another 3 months of pretending to be rich." Lorraine gasped, looking at Malcolm. "Malcolm, is that true?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The paper trail was right there, undeniable and damning. "I am not just a sister you bullied," I said, looking at Savannah. "And I am not just a daughter you discarded. I am a senior investigator for the most feared financial auditing firm in the country. And for the last half year, you haven't been living with a cripple. You have been living with a spy." Ethan looked like he was about to vomit. He knew what Novastone did. He knew that we didn't just find the money. We handed the files to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "And as for the faking it accusation," Adrian spoke up, stepping forward to the table. He opened his own sleek folder and laid out a series of glossy, high-resolution photographs. They were not pleasant to look at. They were surgical photos taken during my last operation, showing the exposed bone, the metal plating, the ravaged muscle tissue. "I took these 6 months ago," Adrian said, his voice hard. "Freya's leg is a ruin. The fact that she can walk at all is a medical miracle combined with an excruciating tolerance for pain. She is not faking the injury. She is faking the wellness. She hides the limp when she can. She masks the agony, because she refused to give you the satisfaction of seeing her suffer anymore." Adrian pointed a finger at Savannah. "You called her a leech, yet she is the only one in this room who is self-sufficient. She is the only one who isn't living on credit and lies." I walked back to the head of the table. I placed my hands flat on the wood, leaning in, looming over my father. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that I could almost hear the air cracking. The daughter who used to beg for approval was gone. In her place stood the professional who destroyed corrupt CEOs for a living. Malcolm looked up at me. His eyes were wide, watery, and full of a dawning horror. He looked at the briefcase, then at the files, then at me. He realized that the daughter he had dismissed as broken was the one holding the sledgehammer. "You presented me with a bill," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You tried to extort me. You tried to steal the last thing I owned." I tapped the stack of files with my index finger. "But you miscalculated the ledger. Dad, I am not the debtor in this family." I paused, letting the words hang there, letting them soak into the expensive carpet and the silk wallpaper. "I am the debt collector." Malcolm's hands began to tremble. It started in his fingers, rattling the paper he was holding, and then spread to his arms. The color had completely vanished from his face. He looked at the steel Novastone card on the table, then back at me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see his child. He saw the end of his world. The silence in the room was brittle, a thin sheet of ice cracking under the weight of the revelations. I did not give them time to tape it back together. I reached for the blue folder, the one labeled with Ethan's name, and flipped it open. "Let us talk about the Aurora Growth Fund," I said, my voice conversational, which only made it more terrifying for the man sitting across from me. "Ethan, You have been pitching this to Dad's golf buddies as a high-yield algorithmic trading strategy. You claimed a consistent 12% return, quarter over quarter. Ethan was sweating profusely now. The moisture beaded on his upper lip, ruining his carefully curated tan. "It is a proprietary strategy," he stammered, his eyes darting to the door. "Market volatility has been challenging." "There is no strategy, Ethan," I said, sliding a bank statement across the table toward Malcolm. "Because there is no trading. I subpoenaed the brokerage records 2 weeks ago. The trading account balance is 0. It has been 0 for 11 months. Malcolm looked down at the paper. His hands shook as he adjusted his reading glasses. 0, but I just received a dividend check last week. $4,000. "Look at the source of the funds, Dad," I instructed. That $4,000 did not come from stock profits. It came from a wire transfer initiated by a Mrs. Edith Miller. She is a 70-year-old widow from Plano who invested her husband's life insurance payout with Ethan 3 days prior. Malcolm looked up, his face ashen. "A Ponzi scheme?" "A textbook Ponzi scheme," I confirmed. "You are not an investor. Dad, you are an accomplice. Every dime of profit you have spent in the last year was stolen from retirees and friends you introduced to Ethan. You are the bait." Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "You do not know what you are talking about. We are in a liquidity hold. It is standard." "It is theft," I corrected him. "But Ethan is not the only one spending money that doesn't exist." I turned my gaze to Savannah. She was trying to shrink into the velvet sofa, looking everywhere but at me. She had lost her earlier bravado. "Savannah," I said softly, "the golden child, the influencer." "I did not know about the fund," Savannah blurted out, her voice shrill. "I am a victim too. Ethan handles the finances. I just sign where he tells me to." "Is that so?" I asked. "Because according to the county clerk's records, you are quite active with a pen." I pulled a document from the red file. It was a secondary mortgage agreement on the Quinn family estate, my parents' house. It was dated 8 months ago. "Dad," I said, "did you authorize a second mortgage on the house for $300,000 to fund a commercial renovation?" Malcolm frowned, confused. "No, the house is almost paid off. I would never leverage the primary residence." "Then you might want to look at this signature." I slid the document to him. Malcolm stared at the bottom of the page. "That looks like my signature. But I never signed this. I was in Cabo that week." "You were," I said, "but Savannah was here, and she has become very good at tracing your handwriting." Savannah gasped. "That is a lie. Ethan made me do it. He said we needed bridge capital." "Bridge capital for what?" I asked. "To renovate a business? No." I reached into the briefcase and grabbed a handful of receipts and invoices, scattering them across the table like confetti. "Here is where the $300,000 went," I said, pointing to the papers. "Here is the invoice for the business trip to the Maldives, $22,000 for a week. Here's the receipt for the limited edition Chanel bag you posted on Instagram last month, $8,000. Here is the lease agreement for your Porsche." I picked up one specific document and held it up. It was a rental agreement. "And this," I said, "is my favorite, the penthouse in Uptown. The one you told Mom and Dad you bought with the profits from your media company? The one you filmed a house tour of for YouTube?" Savannah went pale. "It is an Airbnb," I said, dropping the paper. "You rent it by the month. You do not own a single square foot of property. Savannah, you are homeless. You are jobless, and you are funding your entire fake life by stripping the equity out of our parents' retirement." I was going to pay it back," Savannah screamed, leaping to her feet. "My brand is taking off. I just needed seed money. I had to look successful to get sponsors." "You stole $300,000 to play dress-up," Malcolm roared, his voice breaking. He looked at his favorite daughter with a mixture of heartbreak and disgust. "You forged my signature? You put a lien on my house?" "It gets worse," I interrupted. "Because Savannah and Ethan stopped paying that second mortgage 3 months ago. They spent the cash, but they ignored the bills. I reached into the black folder, the one for Malcolm, and pulled out a single, terrifying sheet of pink paper. "You haven't checked the mail at the house lately, have you, Dad? You let Savannah handle the correspondence because you were too busy building your legacy." I placed the pink paper in the center of the table. "This is a notice of trustees sale," I said. "Because of the default on the unauthorized second mortgage, the bank accelerated the primary note. The house, this house, where we grew up, the symbol of your success, is scheduled to be auctioned off on the courthouse steps tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. The room went dead silent. Malcolm stared at the paper. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Lorraine let out a small whimper and covered her mouth with her hand. "Tomorrow?" Malcolm whispered. "My house? Tomorrow?" "You are bankrupt, Dad," I said brutally. "You do not own the roof over your head. It is gone. Savannah and Ethan spent it on first-class tickets and watches." Savannah turned on Ethan with the ferocity of a cornered animal. "You said you handled it. You said you paid the bank last month." "With what money?" "Savannah?" Ethan screamed back, his face turning purple. "You spent $50,000 on a birthday party for your dog. You told me I had to maintain the image. You said if we looked poor, your sponsors would drop you. You forced me to drain the accounts." "You are a liar," Savannah shrieked, clawing at his arm. "You are a failed investor. You lost it all." "I lost it trying to keep you in Prada," Ethan yelled, shoving her away. He looked wild, his eyes darting between the files and the door. He realized the evidence on the table was enough to send him to federal prison for 20 years. "Give me that!" Ethan lunged. He didn't go for me. He went for the briefcase. He dove across the table, his hands grasping for the files, desperate to destroy the paper trail that condemned him. He never made it. "Doctor," Adrian Holt moved with a speed that belied his calm demeanor. He didn't use a scalpel. He used the combat training from his years as a field medic. He caught Ethan's wrist in midair, twisted it with a sickening torque, and slammed Ethan's chest down onto the mahogany table. Thud! Ethan grunted in pain, his face pressed against the glossy wood, his arm pinned behind his back at an angle that threatened to dislocate his shoulder. "Do not move," Adrian said, his voice calm and dangerous. "I repair bones for a living. Ethan, I know exactly how much pressure it takes to snap this humerus in half. Do not test me." Ethan whimpered, ceasing his struggle. I stood up slowly. I looked at the wreckage of my family. Savannah was sobbing hysterically, not for the pain she caused, but for the loss of her image. Ethan was pinned like a butterfly. Malcolm sat slumped in his chair, staring at the auction notice, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. I walked around the table until I stood next to Malcolm. I rested my hand on the back of his chair. "You called me a leech," I said quietly. I pointed to Savannah, who was hyperventilating. "She stole your house." I pointed to Ethan, who was groaning under Adrian's grip. "He stole your reputation and your friend's money." I looked down at Malcolm. "And you? You stole my childhood to save a few dollars on insurance premiums." I picked up the Nova Stone business card and tucked it back into my pocket. "I paid my own rent with money I earned catching criminals," I said. "I built a career while in constant pain. I never took a dime from you that I didn't pay for in blood." I leaned in close, my voice a whisper that filled the room. "So tell me, Dad, who is the real parasite in this room?" Malcolm did not answer. He couldn't. He simply put his head in his hands and let out a long, broken sob that sounded like a building collapsing. The illusion of the Quinn family, the strength, the wealth, the perfection, had been pulverized, leaving nothing but dust and debt. The atmosphere in the Aurora suite had shifted from a boardroom brawl to a criminal tribunal. Ethan was slumped in the chair where Adrian had forced him, nursing his shoulder, his face a mask of defeat. Savannah was trembling, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks, looking less like a queen and more like a frightened child. But I was not done. I had stripped them of their money and their property. Now, I was coming for their freedom. I reached into the red folder, Savannah's file, and pulled out a thick stack of pharmacy records. The paper made a sharp, slapping sound as I dropped it onto the mahogany table. "Let us discuss pain," I said, my voice low and controlled. "For 5 years, you have watched me struggle to walk. You have watched me grit my teeth when the weather changes. You know exactly what kind of medication I require to function." I slid a specific document toward my mother. "Mom," I said, "look at this. It is a prescription history log from the Texas Prescription Monitoring Program. It tracks every controlled substance dispensed in the state." Lorraine looked down, her hands shaking. "I do not understand. What is this?" "It is a list of 32 prescriptions for OxyContin and hydrocodone," I explained. "All of them filled in the last 6 months, all of them under the name Freya Wilkins." Lorraine looked up, a spark of defensive anger igniting in her eyes. She grasped at the straw I had offered her. "See," she cried out, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I knew it. I knew you were an addict. All that pain, all that whining. It was just an excuse to get high. You are the one bringing shame on this family. Freya, you are a junkie." "It fits," Malcolm added, his voice breathless but eager to latch onto any narrative that made me the villain. "The mood swings, the secrecy. You have been abusing the system." "That is an interesting theory," I said, my expression unmoving. "Except for one small problem." I nodded to Adrian. Adrian stepped forward, leaving Ethan groaning at the table. He placed a certified lab report next to the pharmacy logs. "I run a comprehensive toxicology screen on Freya every 90 days, Adrian stated, his voice clinical and cold. "It is standard protocol for patients with her level of nerve damage to ensure they are managing their pain management responsibly. This is her test from 3 days ago, and the one from 3 months ago, and 6 months ago." He tapped the paper. "Negative, negative, negative. Freya does not take opioids. She manages her condition with non-narcotic nerve blockers and physical therapy because she refuses to dull her mind for her work." "Then who picked up these pills?" Lorraine asked, her voice faltering. "I tracked the fill dates," I said, pulling out a calendar overlay. "On May 12th, a prescription for 60 pills was filled at a CVS in Fort Worth. On that day, I was in London auditing a hedge fund. Here is my boarding pass and my passport stamp." I pulled out another sheet. On June 4th, another 90 pills were picked up at a Walgreens in Plano. On that day, I was in New York giving a deposition for the SEC. I turned my gaze slowly to Savannah. She was pressing herself into the corner of the sofa, looking like she wanted to disappear into the upholstery. "But do you know who was in Fort Worth on May 12th? I asked. "And who was in Plano on June 4th? I produced the grainy surveillance photos Agent Miller had given me. They showed a woman in a blonde wig, wearing large sunglasses, handing a pharmacist an ID card. "That is your daughter," I said to Malcolm. "She stole my old driver's license. She stole my insurance card. She went to urgent care clinics, faked a limp, mocking my injury, by the way, and claimed she was in agony to get scripts." "Savannah?" Malcolm whispered, horrified. I have back pain," Savannah stammered, her voice high and frantic. "From the stress. You do not know the pressure I am under." "You do not have back pain," I countered. "You have a gambling debt and a lifestyle you cannot afford. You didn't take all those pills. Savannah, that is a lethal amount. You took some, and you sold the rest." I threw the Venmo transaction logs on the table. "Street value," I said. "You were dealing opioids to college kids and bored housewives to pay for your lease on the Airbnb. You are not just a fraud. Savannah, you are a drug trafficker, and you used my name, my medical history, to do it. If I hadn't caught this, and the police raided a deal, it would be my face on the mugshot, my career destroyed." Lorraine covered her face with her hands, sobbing. No, not Savannah. She is a good girl." "She is a criminal," Adrian said sharply, "and she committed identity theft against a disabled person. That is a sentencing enhancement in the state of Texas." The room was spinning for them. I could see it. They were trying to process the financial ruin, and now the criminal reality was setting in. But I was not done. I had one more layer to peel back, the deepest, darkest layer. "But that is not the worst thing she has done," I said. "Is it, Dad?" Malcolm's head snapped up. His face was gray, sweat dripping down his temple. "What are you talking about? We are done here. You have made your point." "We are not done," I said. "We are going back to the beginning, 5 years ago, the highway." "It was an accident," Savannah screamed. "You admitted it. You signed the paper." "I signed a confession because I was 17, drugged, and manipulated by the people who were supposed to protect me," I said. "I signed it because I thought I was saving my sister." I reached into the black folder again. This time, I pulled out a document that looked old. It was a photocopy of a police report, but attached to it was a fresh, notarized affidavit. For years, I wondered why the police report was so clean, I said. I wondered why the officers didn't question the fact that I was found in the passenger footwell, pinned by the dashboard, while Savannah was thrown clear of the driver's side door. I held up the affidavit. "This is a sworn statement from Officer Thomas Reynolds," I announced. "He retired last year. He is currently living in a nursing home in Florida. He had a crisis of conscience when Agent Miller and I paid him a visit last week." Malcolm stopped breathing. I saw his chest freeze. "Read it, Dad," I commanded. Malcolm did not move. "I will read it for you," I said. "Officer Reynolds states that on the night of November 14th, 5 years ago, he arrived at the scene of a single-vehicle collision. He observed a young female, Savannah Quinn, stumbling around the vehicle, smelling strongly of tequila, with bruises consistent with a steering wheel impact." "Lies," Malcolm rasped, his voice barely a squeak. "He further states," I continued, my voice rising, filling the room with the force of a verdict, "that a Mr. Malcolm Quinn arrived on the scene before the ambulance. He states that Mr. Quinn pulled him aside and offered him a generous donation to the Policeman's Benevolent Fund, along with a personal cash gift of $50,000 to overlook the seating arrangement." $50,000, I repeated. "That was the price of the truth. You paid a cop $50,000 to frame your injured daughter and save your golden one." "I did it for the family," Malcolm shouted, slamming his fist on the table, the veneer of the businessman finally cracking to reveal the desperate coward underneath. "Savannah had a future. Yale. The connections. You were just good at math. You were quiet. You could handle the gap year. Savannah would have broken in prison." "So you broke me instead?" I asked. "You survived," Malcolm yelled. "Look at you. You are rich. You are successful. It made you tough. I did you a favor." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Savannah stopped crying. The cruelty of his logic hung in the air like smoke. I walked around the table until I was standing inches from him. I looked down at the man who had raised me, the man I had once worshipped. "You did not make me tough, Malcolm," I said, dropping the title of Dad forever. "The pain made me tough. The isolation made me tough. You just made me angry." I placed the final piece of evidence on the table. It was a copy of the original toxicology report from the hospital, the one that had mysteriously vanished from my official medical file 5 years ago. Adrian had found it in the hospital archives, buried but not destroyed. Savannah's blood alcohol level was 0.18, I said. Twice the legal limit. She wasn't just tipsy, she was drunk. She nearly killed me, and you paid $50,000 to make sure I took the blame for her crime. I leaned in, my face level with his. "I have one question," I whispered. "I need to know, when you wrote that check to the cop, when you decided to sacrifice me, did you hesitate? Even for a second?" Malcolm stared at me. His lips trembled. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some excuse, some justification. He started. But he never finished the sentence. His face suddenly turned a terrifying shade of beetroot red. His hand flew to his chest, clutching the silk lapel of his tuxedo jacket. His eyes bulged, and a strangled gasp escaped his throat. "Malcolm?" Lorraine shrieked, jumping up. "Dad!" Savannah screamed. Malcolm tried to stand, but his legs gave way. He collapsed back into the chair, clutching his left arm, his breath coming in short, rattling gasps. "He is having a heart attack," Lorraine yelled, looking at Adrian. "Help him! You are a doctor! Do something!" Adrian looked at Malcolm, then at me. He did not move with the frantic urgency of a savior. He moved with the calm professionalism of a man who had seen too much karma to be surprised. "Freya?" Adrian asked, waiting for my signal. I looked at my father, gasping for air, clutching his chest as if trying to hold his heart inside his ribcage. I looked at the man who had sold me for $50,000. "Call 911, I said calmly to Adrian. "We are not murderers. We are just the truth." I turned back to the table and began to close the files. One by one, the blue, the red, the black, I placed them back into the briefcase. "But do not think this changes anything," I said to the room, as Lorraine frantically loosened Malcolm's tie. "The ambulance will take him to the hospital, but the federal agents are waiting in the lobby, and they have handcuffs for everyone." I snapped the locks of the briefcase shut. Click. It was the loudest sound in the room. Adrian did not dial 911. He tapped the screen of his phone twice, sending a pre-programmed signal that traveled less than 50 feet. The response was immediate, visceral, and loud. The heavy oak doors of the Aurora suite did not open. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the hinges. "Federal agents, nobody move! Hands where we can see them!" The command was a wall of sound. It cut through Lorraine's sobbing and Malcolm's ragged breathing like a knife. 4 men and 2 women poured into the room. They were not wearing the tuxedos of the gala guests. They were clad in blue windbreakers emblazoned with the yellow block letters of the FBI and the DEA. They moved with a kinetic efficiency that turned the luxurious private room into a tactical kill box in seconds. Agent Miller led the charge. He was no longer the quiet observer in the conference room. He was the hammer of the state. He holstered his sidearm as he strode toward the mahogany table, his eyes locked on Ethan. Ethan tried to scramble backward, his chair screeching against the floor, but there was nowhere to go. 2 agents flanked him instantly. "Ethan Cole," Miller announced, his voice booming with the authority of a federal indictment. "You are under arrest for 18 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." "This is a mistake," Ethan screamed, his voice cracking as an agent grabbed his left wrist. "I am a consultant. I have immunity. Malcolm, tell them. Tell them it was your idea." "Turn around," the agent commanded, spinning Ethan against the wall. "You cannot do this," Ethan shouted, thrashing as the cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his skin. "I want my lawyer. I know people. I am a partner at Ironvale." "You are a partner in a Ponzi scheme," Miller corrected him, leaning in close. "And you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it, because every word you scream is going into the report." The click-click of the ratcheting handcuffs echoed in the room. Ethan was hauled upright, his expensive tuxedo jacket bunched up, his hair disheveled. He looked at Malcolm, pleading with his eyes. But Malcolm was slumped in his chair, clutching his chest, his face the color of wet ash. Then, the agents turned to Savannah. My sister was standing by the velvet sofa, pressing herself against the wall as if she could merge with the wallpaper. She held her hands up, palms open, trembling violently. "I didn't do anything," she whimpered, her eyes wide with panic. "I am just a witness. He did it. Ethan did it." A female agent stepped forward. She did not look impressed by Savannah's gold dress or her tear-streaked mascara. She reached for her belt and unclipped a pair of restraints. "Savannah Quinn," the agent said, her tone flat and professional. "You are under arrest for aggravated identity theft, insurance fraud, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute." "Distribute?" Savannah shrieked, the word tearing out of her throat. "I am not a dealer. I am an influencer. I have a brand." "We have your Venmo records, ma'am," the agent said, grabbing Savannah's arm. "No!" Don't touch me, Savannah flailed, trying to pull away. You are hurting me. My followers are watching. You are violating my civil rights. The struggle was brief and humiliating. The agent spun Savannah around with practiced ease. Savannah kicked out, her high heel catching the agent's shin, but it changed nothing. Her hands were forced behind her back. "Stop it, Daddy!" Savannah screamed, looking at Malcolm. "Daddy, make them stop. Pay them. Just pay them." The words hung in the air, a grotesque reminder of how the Quinn family solved problems. But there were no checks large enough to write this away. "Check her purse," Miller ordered. Another agent dumped the contents of Savannah's designer clutch onto the table. Lipstick, a phone, a compact mirror, and 3 orange prescription bottles rolled out. Miller picked one up. He read the label. "Freya Wilkins, oxycodone, filled yesterday." He looked at Savannah. "That is a federal offense right there in your purse." "It is for my sister," Savannah lied, desperate and sobbing. "I was holding it for her. She is the cripple. Look at her leg." "We know all about the leg," Miller said, bagging the evidence. "And we know you are the one on the surveillance tape." "Get them out of here," Miller commanded. The agents began to march Ethan and Savannah toward the door. This was the moment I had anticipated. This was the part of the plan that was not about justice, but about exposure. "Wait," I said. Miller paused, looking at me. "The service exit is blocked by the catering trucks," I lied smoothly. "You will have to take them out through the main ballroom." Miller looked at me. He saw the cold resolve in my eyes. He knew exactly what I was doing. He nodded once. "Move out," Miller signaled. They dragged my sister and her husband out of the VIP suite and into the main hall. The gala was still in full swing. The jazz band was playing a soft, upbeat number. Waiters were circulating with champagne. The room was filled with the cream of Dallas society, investors, politicians, real estate tycoons. They were waiting for Malcolm to return and explain the earlier commotion. Instead, they got a parade. The double doors burst open. Ethan came first, pushed forward by 2 agents. His head was down, but everyone recognized him. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then came Savannah. She was not going quietly. She was sobbing, her makeup ruined, her golden dress twisted. "Let me go," she was wailing. "Do you know who I am?" The music stopped. The conversation died. 300 pairs of eyes turned to watch the golden couple being frog-marched past the ice sculpture. Then, the phones came out. It started with 1 or 2, held up tentatively. Then, as the realization hit that this was real, that the FBI was actually arresting the Quinns, a sea of glowing screens rose into the air. I stood in the doorway of the VIP room, watching. I saw a young woman in the front row, one of Savannah's friends who appeared in her TikToks, hold her phone high, clearly live streaming. "Oh my God. You guys," I could imagine her saying to her chat. "Savannah is being arrested, literally right now." Savannah saw the phones. She saw the recording lights. For a woman who lived for the camera, this was the ultimate nightmare. She tried to duck, to hide her face, but she was handcuffed. She was exposed. The image of perfection she had crafted for 5 years was being dismantled frame by frame. Live on the internet. "Freya!" Savannah screamed when she saw me standing in the doorway. "Help me, tell them! Freya!" I did not move. I did not speak. I simply watched as the heavy glass doors of the hotel lobby swallowed them up, the flashing lights of the police cruisers visible through the windows, painting the ballroom in strobes of red and blue. Inside the VIP room, the air was heavy with the smell of ruin. Malcolm was still in his chair. The paramedics had arrived with the agents, part of Adrian's thorough planning, and were checking his vitals. He was pale, sweating, his hand still clutching his chest, but he was conscious. He was watching the empty doorway where his legacy had just been dragged out in handcuffs. Lorraine had collapsed onto the floor near his feet. She was not crying anymore. She was in a state of catatonic shock, staring at the pattern on the carpet, her hands gripping the hem of her skirt. Agent Miller walked back into the room. He stood over Malcolm. He did not offer sympathy. "Mr. Quinn," Miller said, his voice hard. "The paramedics say you are stable enough to be transported to the hospital for observation, but do not get comfortable." Malcolm looked up, his eyes glassy. "My house, my children." "Your children are going to a federal holding facility," Miller stated. "They will be arraigned on Monday morning. Bail will likely be denied given the flight risk and the severity of the charges." Miller leaned down, placing a hand on the table, right next to the empty space where the briefcase had been. "And as for you," Miller continued, "we have the files Freya provided. We have the tax returns. We have the bribed officer's testimony. The only reason you are not in handcuffs right now is because I do not want you dying in the back of my car before you can stand trial." Malcolm flinched. "We are freezing your assets effective immediately," Miller said. "The business accounts, the personal accounts, the offshore trusts, all of it. You will have a guard at your hospital room door. If you try to leave, you will be arrested on the spot. Do you understand?" Malcolm nodded weakly. He was a man who had spent his life giving orders, and now he had no choice but to obey. "Freya," Malcolm rasped, his voice a broken whisper. He looked past the agent, trying to catch my eye. "Freya, please." I stepped forward. I did not limp. The adrenaline had numbed the pain in my leg. Or perhaps the weight of the burden I had been carrying was finally gone. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sat by my hospital bed 5 years ago and told me to take the blame. I looked at the mother who had slapped me an hour ago for ruining a party. "There is nothing left to say," I told him. "We are family," Lorraine whispered from the floor, reaching out a hand toward me. "We are all we have." "No," I said, stepping back out of her reach. "You had a daughter. You had a sister. You traded her for a reputation. You sold her for $50,000 and a fake scholarship. You do not have a family anymore. Lorraine, you have co-defendants." I turned to Adrian. He was packing up his medical tablet, his face grim but satisfied. "Are we done?" I asked him. "Medically, he will survive," Adrian said, glancing at Malcolm. "Whether he survives the indictment is another question." "I meant us," I said. "Are we done?" "We are done," Adrian nodded. I walked out of the VIP room. I walked past the stunned guests who were whispering in huddled groups. I walked past the staff who were hurriedly clearing the champagne glasses. I walked through the lobby of the Aurora Grand, the same lobby where I had entered hours ago as a cripple in a server's uniform. I stepped out into the night air. It was humid, but it felt clean. The flashing lights of the police cars were fading into the distance as they transported Savannah and Ethan to the federal detention center. I stood on the sidewalk. I did not smile. Revenge, I realized, was not sweet. It was not a triumph. It was simply a correction. It was the balancing of an equation that had been unequal for too long. I felt a profound, heavy exhaustion settle over me, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the tiredness of a builder who has finally laid the last brick. I looked down at my hand. I was still holding the handle of the briefcase. My knuckles were white. I loosened my grip. The blood flowed back into my fingers. The storm was over. The house of Quinn had fallen, and I was the only one left standing among the wreckage. The federal agents had cleared the room, taking the noise and the chaos with them. The paramedics were waiting just outside the double doors to transport my father to the hospital, giving us a final few minutes of privacy at my request. The Aurora Suite, once a symbol of opulence, now felt like a tomb. The air was stale, smelling of spilled champagne and fear. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, looking down at the two people who had created me, broken me, and then tried to sell the pieces. Malcolm was slumped in the leather chair, his face pale and slick with sweat, his hand still resting protectively over his heart. Lorraine sat on the floor beside him, her expensive gown ruined, looking up at me with eyes that held no recognition. They did not know who I was anymore. The daughter they thought they could bully had vanished, replaced by a stranger holding a briefcase full of ruin. "You should go," Malcolm rasped, his voice weak and thready. You have done enough damage. You have destroyed your family. Are you happy? I have not destroyed the family. Malcolm, I corrected him, my voice devoid of emotion. I simply exposed it. There is a difference. I reached into the briefcase one last time. There were no more criminal files. There were no more surveillance photos. There was just one thin, crisp document clipped to a heavy card stock folder. We have one final piece of business to conclude before the ambulance takes you away, I said. I placed the folder in front of him. What is this? Lorraine asked, pulling herself up from the floor to sit on the arm of Malcolm's chair. More lies? More accusations? On the contrary, I said. It is a solution. You saw the pink foreclosure notice. The bank was going to auction off the house tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. You were going to lose everything. Malcolm looked at the folder, hope flickering in his eyes for a brief, pathetic second. You paid it? You helped us? I did not pay it off, I said coldly. I bought it. I opened the folder to the first page. It was a transfer of deed. Ironvale Capital Partners purchased the distress note from the bank this morning, I explained. As I told you, I am Ironvale, which means the bank does not own the house anymore. I do. Every brick, every shingle, every square inch of marble you are so proud of. It belongs to me legally and irrevocably. Malcolm's jaw slackened. You own my house? My house, I corrected him. And right now, you are trespassing. Lorraine burst into fresh tears, reaching out to grab my hand, which I pulled away. Freya, please, you cannot throw us out on the street. Not with your father's heart. Not with Savannah in jail. We have nowhere to go. We are your parents. I am aware of our biological connection, I said. It is the only reason I'm making this offer. I flipped the page to the second document. It was a standard Texas residential lease agreement. I am willing to let you stay, I said. Relief washed over them. Malcolm slumped back, closing his eyes. Thank God. Thank God. We will pay you back. Freya, once this blows over, once I get the accounts unfrozen, you will pay me rent, I interrupted. Starting on the 1st of the month. Malcolm opened his eyes. Rent? It is a business transaction, I said. I have calculated the fair market value of the property, factored in the risk of having tenants with a history of financial fraud, and adjusted for the emotional labor of dealing with you. I pointed to the figure at the bottom of the page. The rent is $4,500 a month. Lorraine gasped. $4,500? That is impossible. We do not have that kind of money. The accounts are frozen. That number should sound familiar, I said, looking at Malcolm. I pulled it from your ledger. It is the exact amount you claimed it cost to keep me alive each month. The electricity, the food, the inconvenience fees. You charged me $4,500 to be your daughter. So, I am charging you $4,500 to be my tenants. We cannot pay this, Malcolm whispered, his pride finally turning to ash. I have no income. My reputation is gone. Who will hire me now? I looked at them. I looked at the hands that had never known a day of hard labor. The soft skin of people who believed they were entitled to the world. There is a Walmart down the street, I said. They are always hiring greeters. Or perhaps you can find work in a call center. I hear they have excellent training programs. You expect me to work at a grocery store? Malcolm spat, a flash of his old arrogance returning. I expect you to survive, I said. Just like I did. I worked while my body was screaming in pain. I worked while you mocked me. If I could build a fortune from a hospital bed, you can certainly stock shelves to pay your rent. I uncapped a pen and placed it on the lease. Sign it, I commanded, or I will have the sheriff execute an eviction notice on Monday morning, and I promise you, the neighbors will enjoy watching your furniture being dragged to the curb even more than they enjoyed the live stream of Savannah's arrest. Malcolm looked at the pen. He looked at Lorraine, who was sobbing quietly into her hands. He looked around the empty VIP room, realizing that his empire of smoke had finally cleared, leaving him with nothing but the hard reality of his own making. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. It took him a long time to sign. He had to stop twice to catch his breath. When he finished, he didn't look up. He just pushed the paper away as if it burned him.
"Done," he whispered.
"Good," I said, picking up the lease and sliding it into my briefcase. "Rent is due on the 1st. Do not be late. I am a very strict landlord." I turned and walked toward the door. Adrian was waiting for me. He had watched the entire exchange with a stoic expression, holding the door open.
"Freya," Malcolm called out one last time.
I stopped us, but I did not turn around. "Why?" he asked. "Why didn't you just leave? Why did you have to burn it all down?" I looked at the heavy oak door frame. "Because fire cleanses," I said, "and some things are too rotten to be saved."
I walked out.
We moved through the hotel lobby. The party was effectively over. Guests were streaming out, whispering, checking their phones, casting nervous glances in my direction. I ignored them. I walked with a rhythm that was all my own. The pain in my leg was there, a dull, familiar companion, but it no longer felt like a weakness. It felt like a reminder of what I had survived. We reached the front entrance. The valet brought Adrian's car around. It was a sensible sedan, not a flashy sports car. I stopped on the sidewalk. The night air was cool against my face. I looked down at the aluminum crutch in my hand. For 5 years, it had been my third leg. It had been the symbol of my dependency, the visual cue that told the world I was broken. Savannah had snatched it from me to prove I was weak. But I had walked out of that room without leaning on it. I walked over to a large, ornate trash receptacle near the valet stand. It was polished brass, gleaming under the hotel lights. I lifted the crutch. It felt light, hollow. "Are you sure?" Adrian asked softly. "I am sure," I said. I dropped it. It made a loud, metallic clatter as it hit the bottom of the bin, a final, dissonant note to end the symphony of the evening. I turned to Adrian. I stood straight. My left leg throbbed, but I shifted my weight, finding my balance, finding my center. I did not need the aluminum tube. I had a spine of steel now. "They thought I could not stand if I did not cling to them," I said, looking back at the hotel where my parents were waiting for an ambulance and my sister was waiting for a lawyer. "They thought I was the vine wrapped around their tree." I looked at Adrian and smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. They were wrong. They were the ones holding on to me to keep from drowning, and I just let go. I got into the car. As we pulled away, merging into the Dallas traffic, I didn't look back at the Aurora Grand. I looked forward, to the road ahead, to the silence of my apartment, and to a life that was finally, completely my own. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I hope you enjoyed Freya's journey from a silenced victim to the architect of her own freedom. If you enjoyed this story, please let me know in the comments below where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring more of these dramatic tales to life. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next story.